You guys, I gotta be honest. Sometimes when I grab that phone in the morning and I go to my news aggregator that I look at, or I check in on social media, wow. Sometimes it is like a gray cloud of doom, gloom, sad disagreements just comes flying across the screen. And I'm left early in the morning trying to figure out how to perk myself up after having a good dose of that. Well, today on the Modern Motherhood Podcast, I'm your host, Julie Lyles Carr, and we're going to be talking to Melanie Shankle about how we can bring the bright side of things back into perspective, not in a way that denies some of the realities of the things going on in our world, but in a way that is both faith honoring and is light to others. I'm so excited for you to hear today from my guest, Melanie Shankle.
Thanks so much for driving up today and being with us.
Thanks for having me, Julie. I'm happy to be here today.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you have been in Texas how long? Your whole life? Or
Whole life. Born and raised Texan girl. So whole life.
You know, we have a lot of listeners in the Pacific Northwest. So how would you describe what it means to be from Texas? How do you define how Texans are just a little bit different?
I think Texans are, it started at our roots. Like, to me, we're just I always say Texas is almost like it's a country unto itself. Like, we're our own culture, we're our own language, we kind of have our own understanding, and I think Texans have pride. I'm like, what other state, do we make waffles in the shape of our state?
Yeah.
You know, that's, like, you'll never convince a Texan that their state isn't the best state, so don't even try.
Don't even bother.
We're just proud. And I do think Texas, because it's so big, it's like you've got the mountains, you've got the ocean, you've got the lakes, you've got the hills. It's just, I think it's the best of all worlds.
All worlds. I've been in Texas now, this round, 16 years.
Okay.
And then I was here 5 years prior to that before we moved to Oklahoma. And I guess at this point, since I'm closing in on over 21 years in the state now, that at some point I have to say, oh, it looks like I'm a Texan.
Yeah.
Having lived all over the U.S., but the longest I've ever lived is here in Texas. And I don't always think that I come off as the most Texan.
Yes.
And yet, I was visiting one of my daughters when she was living in Paris, and people would walk up to me, and they wouldn't say, oh, American? They would say, oh, Texan?
Oh, interesting.
I thought,
okay.
Is it the jewelry? Is it the sunglasses? Is it the hair?
I always think the hair. We like a little more volume.
A little more volume, a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think we're keeping Aquanet and some of its subsidiaries and some serious business here. So maybe that's it. I just was kind of startled that I could be recognized that way.
Yeah. I think it's a good thing.
I think so too. So how did you get into the writing game? Was this something that you always wanted to do, or was this something that once you had your daughter started to kind of emerge? What was that for you?
I had always loved to write. It was always, even as a kid, I can remember I loved to read as a kid, first of all. And I think those two things go so hand in hand, because if you love to read, you love words. I love to see how other writers put words together. So I feel like even from a young age, I kept journals and I would write stories and I had a diary. But it's one of those, I always say, you don't go to college and go, I think I'm going to be a writer, because that kind of feels like telling your parents I'm not going to have a real job.
Yeah. I'm going to be a pop singer.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just this pie in the sky, how do books get made?
Yeah.
So I had really not done writing at all, and I was in pharmaceutical sales. But when I had my daughter in 2003, it's just that stage of, I wasn't a scrapbooker, but you know how your kids are doing all those things and you want to keep up with it. And I had started reading blogs when I was on maternity leave. And so one night, right before she turned 3, I thought, I'm going to start a blog. So I went to my free blogger.com blog spot and started writing. And it just became a place where I told stories. And initially it was just kind of all about our day to day. And then it became telling old stories about my family or college memories. And the readership grew, and it ended up turning into the opportunity to write books and all kinds of things that I couldn't have even imagined.
Now, you're poignant, but you are also funny. When did you know you were funny?
I don't know, because I'm not, it's funny. I was somewhere a year ago and somebody introduced me as a comedian, and I was like, oh no, that's too much pressure. Don't say I'm a comedian. The first time I vividly remember it, and this is such a random, the way, but in 4th grade, I wrote a short story that we had to write as part of a writing assignment. And my teacher had me get up and read it in front of the class, and it made the whole class laugh. And that was my moment of, I can make people, I like making people laugh. Like, this is funny. But I just think in real life, like, my dad has a super dry wit. And so we always say we kind of prize humor over everything sometimes. So funny is just a real valuable asset. So I feel like I'm surrounded by people who try to be funny and are funny, and I really like that in a person.
Yeah, it was a real high value in my family of origin.
Yeah.
I mean, my dad wanted us to make straight A's.
Yeah.
And if you could at least get close to that and you could make him laugh, you were in good graces.
That's
we
it.
we really did practice that, I think, as a family. And now with the family I have with my husband, I would say that laughter is a huge staple of who we are. And I think sometimes to be funny, you have to take risks and you have to be around people who will allow you to do that.
Yes.
So sometimes our kids say some things that I go, oh,
yeah, for sure.
Testing out the material. Did you have some times that you kind of tested out some stuff and maybe it just went a little sideways?
Oh, I think for sure. I mean, to me, that's the hallmark of being a funny person or using humor, is there are times that it is to great success and you're like, I nailed it. And there are other times you say it and you immediately go, oh, I can tell, I wish I could take those words back. Like it was a little too sharp or too much or over the top. And I see it with my daughter now because she is hilarious, which as a mom, there's like nothing that makes me more proud.
I know.
Like from an early age where she would say something, I'd be like, how do you know to be that funny? That's brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, like you're so proud. But there are times, especially now as a teenager, where she'll say something, I'm like, oh, you can't say
That's
that.
a little,
That's a little over the line. Let's take that back just a little bit.
Yeah. So we have some similar conversations at our house, and we try to make it a place where we're telling some of the other kids, look, it's okay to fail here. Just know that, in common vernacular.
Yeah.
Given that your mom's in women's ministry, I don't know. Maybe rein it back a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. A little bit, please.
Do you find that coming from a family that valued humor, is it also sometimes a bit of a defense when you face some challenging stuff or some tough stuff? Like,
I think 100%. I mean, I think, when I look at humor, and I think my dad and I are the same in this, where it's like it's for sure a defense mechanism that we've used. I think we both are the kind, we don't like conflict. Like we would both say we don't like conflict, we don't like being in it. So humor becomes a way to diffuse a situation.
Right.
And sometimes not deal with it. So it's like, I think one of the things I've had to learn is like, I don't always need to go for the funny. Like sometimes I need to
sit
go
in the
deep
sad.
or sit in the sad or whatever, because I like to, okay, let's bring it back up a notch. So
I feel that compelling need too. I think, and it comes from a place, I want people to be happy and content. And when people are sad or something's heavy, then I'm probably going to go for the one-liner that probably isn't always
yes.
But it's driven out of wanting people to feel better. I think it's also a bit of a buffering and a defense, absolutely. So that's one thing that we've been trying to work through with our kids a little bit, is how to sit in an emotion that isn't necessarily comfortable, because some of them are so funny. It's a really delicate balance.
It is, and it's hard because I think sometimes it's a gift to be that person that can bring a room up or to bring a mood up, because it needs to.
Right.
But I think it's kind of knowing, I always think about Mark Twain always said that tragedy plus time equals humor.
Yeah.
And it's like knowing what's that time. Like how much time?
Too soon.
Too soon.
That's
a whole thing.
That's a legit deal.
Yeah.
That's a legit deal.
That's too soon.
Yeah.
So,
Would you say that you come to the table as a more positive person in general, or do you think with that comedic, side lane to you that maybe life seems a little bit dimmer sometimes? Where do you think you land in that scale?
I think, I've thought about it so much with this book, but I'm a positive person. Like my go-to is, and I can get down in the dumps but my go-to is I don't like to be in that place. So I feel like I'm somebody who tries to make it positive as soon as I can. And that doesn't mean I don't have bad days, but I feel like that's my default, is going to be more optimistic than pessimistic.
Right. I love your new book, On the Bright Side, in which you're taking a look at these things that we're faced with today and how to look for those places where good happens. Do you think that social media has, in a way, made us more susceptible to what I would call an Eeyore environment, more of a pessimism environment? Or do you think that it has helped lighten the load in our lives?
Oh, I think it's for sure created a generation of total pessimists. I mean, it's so negative, and I think it can be so on so many levels. I think that from a comparison standpoint, as women, I think that we can start to feel like we aren't good enough and we aren't measuring up, which can make us feel inadequate and depressed. I think that when you go on Twitter and you see there's no filter to I'm going to let this sit for a minute. It's like something happens and everybody immediately reacts. And I think there's been such a culture of just going right to the worst case scenario. And, that was almost a catalyst for when I started writing the book. It was the beginning of 2017. So it was right after the 2016 election had happened. And what struck me, because I've just said I was a positive person, but like I would get on social media and my gut reaction was, I don't like any of you.
Yeah.
Whether you believe what I believe or don't.
Not, yeah.
You're
the way you're handling
yes,
yourself here.
You're all on my nerves. Like everybody needed a timeout. Just everybody needed to go to their separate corners because it felt so contentious. And it's like we had forgotten just love and grace and mercy and embracing each other, even though we have differences. It was like, if you think one thing different than me, then you are my enemy. And I thought, when did that become our mindset?
Right.
So,
I wondered too if social media, in a sense, so you'd go out to a dinner party with some friends and everybody would chat, but in that face-to-face moment, there was a gentility that was expected.
Yes.
So even if somebody had voted for the other party or thought this about this piece of legislation or whatever, within the confines of being face-to-face, you might learn somebody had a different thought than you, but it all was pretty civil. And there's something in the social media platform to me, or in the blogging platform, or even in some of the ways that we're now putting out different content in a variety of ways, that civility seems to have been lost. Are you seeing that as you take a purview of this world that we've both been a part of since, the mid 2000s? But that shift is so interesting to me.
And I think that's exactly what it is. Because I think if I'm sitting across the table from you, then I know that we have kids the same age. I know that we have this shared experience, that we're in PTO together or we go to the same church. And I know your heart. So I don't immediately cast you as this villain. I feel like we've gotten in these camps where it's like, if you believe this, then it means that you're this, this, and this. And if you're this way, then this is who you are. And it's, we aren't seeing the heart. And that's to me where, like, on my social media and whatever, I've never ventured into politics, and I tend to stay away from all of that, because I'm like, if I can sit down with you and have a face-to-face conversation, I'm happy to tell you what I believe and why I believe it or whatever. But you need to see my heart to know who I am. And I want to see your heart, and because we have so much more in common than we have separate. And I'm like, are we really going to, in real life, you would never, I hope, walk away from a good friendship just because you voted differently. Right. It just seems kind of pointless. But I think in social media, that happens all the time.
Yeah, I find that to be really fascinating. And it seems to be indicative to me that, this is going to sound strange, because we have access to more information than ever before. We have access to deeper research and, the annals of history at a button. And yet it almost feels like to me, in some of the dialogue and some of the ways that things are presented, both through our news media and through our social media platforms, that we have lost the art of being curious.
Yes.
We seem to be campers.
Yeah.
More than curiosity seekers, in terms of, I know my opinion, I'm camping here. Do you find that seems to be something of a lost jewel, that we don't really know how to ask questions of each other anymore that lead to a place of really wanting to understand why somebody is in a position they're in?
Yeah, and I think it's become a thing where, and I think maybe perpetuated by the media, where it is that thing of, I don't know who to trust anymore. And so where is a voice that I can trust to give me an even view of whatever the issue is? We've kind of lost that part of it. And I think it's a lost art, because I noticed at one point, I was like, I'm going to kind of mute everybody on my Twitter feed who's getting on my nerves or who doesn't agree with what I'm just going to kind of, homogenize it a little bit. Right. And I did that. But after about a week, I was like, well, this is boring. Yeah. And this is boring, and it's not giving me anything to think about.
Right.
Because I don't want to just assume that I'm right about something. Like, I'm okay. And I think that's it, is be secure enough. Like, I'm okay if you want to challenge me on that. Let's do it in a respectful way. But it's good for me because it makes me think deeper about, well, why do I believe that? Or why is that important to me? And then I want to hear your view, because I think that's how we grow, And I mean, I hope, you and I are kind of the same age. It's like, I hope that I'm not the same person now that I was at 20.
Right.
Right. I hope that I've grown and changed and evolved a little bit since then.
Absolutely. It's that tension between truth and grace, right?
Yeah.
Those things that we do want to stand for, and as people of faith, the things we think we should stand for. And at the same time, we were told by Christ that he wanted us to be known because of our love for each other.
That's it.
So what are some ways that people can begin to navigate some of those very tumultuous waters when they stand on a certain position and they know there are people in their world who don't stand on that position?
Yeah.
how can we begin to do a better job cultivating a curiosity and a respect for one another, and understand that that doesn't necessarily mean you're compromising where you're at? I think sometimes people think that some kind of grace and tolerance toward one another means some kind of compromise or acquiescence. So can you speak to that?
I mean, I think it starts, I think you said it, I think it starts with love. As you remember at the heart of it all, that we're called to love our fellow man as we walk this earth. I mean, to me, those are the tenets of Christianity, is to, love God and love mercy and to walk humbly with our God. And I think you can't live that out if you're not listening to and being a part of other people's lives, and realizing that it's not I have friends that believe a lot of different things than I do, but I feel like by us being friends, it doesn't mean that, they may know this is where I stand, but I'm like, but what we have at our heart is so much more in common. We laugh at the same things. We like the same movies. We like the same TV shows. And I think for my Christian friends who fall on all different sides, where I'm like, here's what we have in common. We love Jesus. We want to share him with the world. We're all doing the best that we can. And the way you are doing that may look different than me, but I also believe that isn't God big enough that he's using you in this space and me in this space, and neither one takes away from the other, because they're equally important, even if they're different.
Right, right. So how do you think we should be looking at a lot of the events in our world today? I think sometimes people might hear the phrase "on the bright side" and think, well, is that something about denial? Is that something about not being realistic about some of the challenges that are being faced in our country and our culture? So when you say those words, "on the bright side," what does that mean to you in context of some of the harsh realities that are part of our today?
I think it's just to remember, I think that if all you do is look for the dark and look for the bad, then that's all you're going to find. I think the more we look for the dark, it's going to continue in a person, in an event, in anything. But I think when you shift your perspective and go, listen, horrible things happen, because they do. All you have to do is read the news or talk to your neighbor or sit in a church group, and people have terrible, heartbreaking stories. But I'm like, but isn't there still light somewhere? Like, and maybe not in that situation, in that moment, but did you wake up this morning with breath in your lungs and a roof over your head and you're alive? It's like, just find it. And some days to me, it's as small as that. And then some days it can be great, where it's like, this promotion came through, or this thing I've been praying for happened. But it's just having a perspective shift to where you're like, if you look for the light, I think you're going to continue to find more light. And I think to me, it was a really, that I feel like the death of Kobe Bryant kind of shook everybody to their core, because it was that here's this somebody who seemed almost immortal,
right.
And was a hero to so many, and for him to die at such a young age, and his daughter and the whole group on the plane, where it was just these young lives full of promise. But I thought, even in that, if that gave the rest of us this appreciation for, like, I'm here, like, I'm still alive, I can still make a difference, I can make changes, I can love better and live better, then that's the bright side, you know? And it's not being Pollyanna, because it's very much saying there are terrible things that happen, but how can we dial in and change our focus a little bit?
How do we combat what seems to be a little bit of a monster today in our culture, which is a sense of jadedness, almost a suspicion? So regardless of which side of the political aisle you land on, regardless of what you think of certain cultural momentum within our culture and those type things, I feel like there's sort of a cynicism that is very interesting to me right now. And again, I'm like you. I don't believe in having some, there are no weeds in my garden. There are no weeds in my garden. Like, I don't know that that's all that effective. Although I have to say, I have a couple people in my world that is their life approach, and their life seems pretty spanky. I don't know. So maybe it's not all bad. Maybe there is something to the Pooh Bear approach. But how do we identify within ourselves a creeping jadedness or cynicism that's not serving us well, versus understanding something that is simply, there's the reality of the situation, it is what it is, and we need to come up with good strategies for managing that. Yeah,
and I think a little cynicism, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, I think a little bit is sometimes healthy, because I think a cynicism is sometimes just looking at things shrewdly and being wise about, am I reading this situation correctly? But I think it's also, I feel like, and I tell my daughter this all the time, and I try to live it, is we're going to believe the best of somebody until we have reason not to. And to me, if I can continue to, if I see somebody and I do feel cynical about this or this situation, but sometimes it's sitting back and going, okay, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut and see how it plays out and see what happens, and kind of see what fruit comes from it before I judge it or decide that it's less than or not real or whatever. It's like just kind of to take a step back and just wait and see.
Well, and sometimes cynicism is funny.
Yeah, cynicism, listen, it is. I mean, cynicism and funny go a little hand in hand.
Yeah.
And I think it's okay to sometimes be, because you don't want to walk around, I'm not saying walk around like this doe-eyed innocent all the time. I mean, there are people that can do that, but I think it's okay to be shrewd and to be wise and to take your time and not jump right into a situation, to just give it some time.
Right. See if it proves itself.
Yeah, that's it. So,
what do you think of, what do you make of what feels like to me a cultural tendency right now, that we tend to seem to think that a particular person in office or a particular legislation or a particular movement on the part of the church or whatever is the thing that's going to fix it all? Is that a Pollyanna style of thinking to the max that leads us to a place of then feeling kind of down when that thing may not have proven to be the ultimate solution?
I mean, I think so, because I think at the end of the day, like as Christians, here's what I always go back to. Like when everybody's like, well, this is happening and this is happening. And I'm like, hey, y'all, have y'all read the Bible? I mean, like,
Anna said,
it's in this world.
Yeah.
We are going to have trouble. Like, we are going to have hardships. We are going to have wars and famines and earthquakes. And none of that is going to go away until Jesus comes back. It's just not. And so I think if you're buying into that any politician can fix it or any legislation can fix it, or if only this party were in control in the government right now, it would look different. I think you're putting your hope in false things, because I'm like, no man can fix what God created. I mean, only God is in control of all that stuff. And to me, I feel like that's where I go back to the source of my peace and finding the bright side, even in the midst of all of it, where I'm like, thank God that we do have God. Literally, Thank God that we're not in charge of fixing all this, because we're a mess.
Right. So in that place of wanting to find appropriate and unifying and sweet curiosity and compassion for one another, where are the places that we are supposed to take a stand? Like, where's that supposed to happen? Because I think there are those who would say, well, this sounds lovely, and we're going to look on the bright side, and we're going to extend a hand to that person we disagree with. But is there a place, or when is it appropriate to say, okay, well, this is the thing that this one's going to be a non-starter for me?
I mean, I think you can say that, and I think it's okay to articulate that. I think, number one, we're always called to speak the truth in love. And I think when you have somebody or a situation in your life where you need to say, this is a deal breaker for me. But I think there's a way to say that, but still cover it in love. It doesn't mean that I don't love you. It doesn't mean that I don't support you and will be here for you no matter what. But here is this one is, you're not going to change my mind on this thing. But I think there's been too much of it that we have to cut that person out, or we have to cut that relationship out. And I don't think that's the way it was meant to be. I think that sometimes some relationships, if you have all these differences, you may have to work harder to find your common ground. But if that person is valuable to you, then I think you find that common ground. Because I think there's been so much in Christianity where people want to take this hard stand, and it comes across as so unloving. And it's like, no, you can disagree with this piece of theology or with this thing, but it doesn't mean that you cut that individual.
It has to be the sum total.
That's it. It doesn't mean that it's the end of, you still love. We're still called to love. And I think when you look at Jesus and all the different people that he was with, it was, he was with the sinners and the tax collectors and all of that stuff. And it wasn't that he agreed with them. It was that he still loved them.
He valued them. Yeah, absolutely.
We'll get right back to the interview in just a moment. You may have noticed at the top of the show or at the end of the show, I'm always encouraging you to go check out something. It's called All Mom Does. And I just want to make sure that you're taking advantage of this amazing resource for the journey you're on when it comes to your kids, your marriage, your spiritual life, your job, your relationships. All Mom Does is this incredible community of women just like you, walking through so many of the same things. And you can go on allmomdoes.com. You'll find all kinds of fantastic blog posts, great information, but also check out All Mom Does on the socials, because there's such an incredible community that is developed there. Women encouraging women sharing their lives. So be sure and check it out. I know you hear it at the top and the end of the show, but it's so important I had to just stop right here and mention again to you. Go to allmomdoes.com and All Mom Does on Instagram and Facebook. You're going to find friendship, inspiration, and so much more.
I'm sitting here as a mom of 8. You're sitting here as a mom of 1.
Yes.
We, our daughters, my daughter Journey, your daughter Caroline, are the same age. And I have a lot of people ask me about why 8, and, to which I've often responded because spontaneity causes people. But for you and your husband, how was that decision about the size of your family? How did you come to that?
It's funny because we did not set out, like when we were dating or first married, we didn't say we're only going to have 1 child. That wasn't ever something we really discussed. We were married 6 years before I had Caroline. I think part of it was I had a really difficult miscarriage before I had her. That was bad enough that I think there were questions as to whether or not I was even going to be able to get pregnant again and what that process would be like. So I felt like when she came along, felt kind of like a miracle. And then as she grew, at the time I was still working full time, and I just, I think there are people that are equipped to different things, and it's, it's your different road. And I think it started to become evident to me where I was like, I don't know that I'm made to have, I kind of thought I would have 1 more, but I knew I was not going to have 6 more. I mean, that was just never going to be my thing. And then right about the time Caroline was about to start kindergarten, I was about to turn 40, so I kind of told my husband, I was like, it kind of feels like now or never. Like, we're either going to do this or we're not.
Or we're done,
Yeah, we're done. And he was like, well, let's just pray about it. And he was always like, I'm great with 1. I love my girl. I'm happy. And I was like, okay. And so I really prayed about it, and I felt like God really clearly said to me, like, you're done. Like, this is it for you. And it was like, you're going to give birth to something else, but it's not going to be a child. And that was kind of when my writing career started to grow, and I felt like God gave me this ministry, and not another child. And it's always been, and I always want to be clear because I know that there are so many people that have 1 and then struggle with infertility. I mean, but it was very much for us a choice that we made to very intentionally just have 1 child, and we've been happy with it.
Right.
So
it's funny because in my journey with, the number of kids and what people expect and what they think that statement is, I've had people say, so are you saying everybody should have 8 kids? And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying what you're saying, which is it seems to be one of the places that we don't actually seek God's will. It's weird. We'll talk to him about, should we take the job? Should we move? Should we buy the house? But we don't often seem to seek, what is your will or your guiding or your leading about the size of our family? And we then tend to think that the number of children someone has, if that's more than average or fewer than average, is somehow some kind of statement that we're making to everybody.
Yes.
And it's not.
No,
so,
No. And it's so, and that's, I have so many people like will email me and say, like, I'm thinking about having 1 child. Like, should I just have an only child? But I think it goes back to, and you have it with 8, like I have it with 1, where people are like, whoa, like that's unusual,
Right.
But it's like, no, you need to, that's such a personal decision. Nobody can tell you. And I had so many people that be like, well, she needs a sister. Like, what happens if she's left alone in the world and all these things? But I thought, well, number one, it's all going to be okay. And we can't bring another human into this world just to help take care of us when we're old. It's really got to be, this is a person. So I think it's such a personal decision how many kids somebody, and that number's different for everybody.
Right. So it's kind of fast tracking you in a sense in terms of hitting the empty nest thing, because, if you had gone on to have a couple others, you might still be back doing science projects. You know what? Here's what I want to do for you, Melanie. I would so appreciate it if on occasion, if you were just feeling that nostalgia, why don't you just drive on up, and I'm going to tell the twins, meet Aunt Melanie.
Yes.
She's going to help you with the volcano, with the ivory soap and the microwave experiment. I just want you... That's just who I am.
So
I just want to
nice.
cover that for you.
That's
You're
so nice,
so
but
welcome.
I feel like I can't take that from you. I feel like you really need to get to experience
I really need to
that.
do that a 7th and an 8th time. Okay. All right. But how is that for you now, hitting that stage where with Caroline, she's going to be launching into college and doing all those things? What kind of shift do you think that's going to bring to your family dynamic?
Oh, I think it's going to be weird. It's such a strange, and no matter how many you have, when that last one is gone, it's like now it's just my husband and I. It's back to, and everything has revolved around her so much.
Right.
Our social activity, or her soccer games and her stuff, and that's what we do. But I think that's one of the areas where I've had to remind myself to look on the bright side and not see it. I've really challenged myself because I don't want to spend the next year and a half she's home being sad.
Right.
And to not look at it as an ending, but to look at it as a new beginning. And that it's going to be a shift. But I think there's something, and you know this because you've got grown kids now, but there's something so incredible about seeing them come into their own and become these human beings that you've raised and probably at times wondered if they were going to turn out okay at all. And
Praise the Lord.
yes, I mean, all the prayers. And is when you finally start to see a lot of that come to fruition, there's something so sweet in that.
Yeah.
And so I think my sadness at her leaving is also there's such an excitement in seeing where she's going to go and what she's going to do and what's next, and knowing that, I mean, here's what we know is you never quit being a mom,
right,
know, and they're
right.
always, they don't know how much they're always going to still need their moms and want their moms, and how much smarter we get the older they get,
Right, I know. So look at that.
Yeah, look how that comes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I find it interesting, being the ages and stages that you and I are, I feel like, and maybe I'm just kidding myself, but it feels like to me there's sort of this renaissance for women when the kids do get launched. Instead of it sort of being, well, that chapter's closed and the thing that was the biggest accomplishment of your life is done. It feels like to me, our culture, our society is beginning to go, oh,
yeah.
and now you can get going on the next thing. Does that feel like that to you? Or is that me just telling myself there's life beyond multiplication tables?
Yeah, I think there really is. I mean, I think it's that thing of that it's, I think aging isn't what it used to be, It's, I mean, I think they've always said, I've heard like 40's the new 30, but I almost think 50's almost the new 30, where there's
Preach,
so,
preach,
and
sister.
I believe it. But I think, like, I look back at my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, my nanny, and she went back when her kids were in college and got her real estate license and sold real estate and like bought herself Cadillacs and diamond rings and the whole deal till she was like in her late 70s.
Yeah.
And I'm like, she was kind of ahead of her time, that she really reinvented herself. But I think for women now, we get to our age and it's like there's still so much out there and so many opportunities to do new things. And that's kind of where I look at with Caroline, where I'm like, I've been so careful about my travel schedule and being home more and being intentional. But I look and I'm like, once she's launched, I'm like, it kind of opens up this whole new chapter to me, doing some things and taking some trips and doing stuff that I haven't done before, just because I'll have time now.
Right, right.
And I think there's such a lie that women buy into if you feel like you're past your point of usefulness, because I'm like, there's always, think how many young women would love to have a mentor or an older friend to speak wisdom into their life and to help them know, like, you're going to survive having these toddlers and all of that stuff. Like, there's just so many places we can go.
Absolutely. And it is that place, really, to me, of being very intentional to stay relevant, to keep your head in the game, to not say, well, I don't understand the Snapchats and Facebooks, but to really understand, if you really want to sow into the next generation, you need to go live where they live.
Yeah.
And when you do that, I'm sure you do, I find that there are a lot of women who want to talk to me. I don't feel like anybody is saying, well, your youngest are now 12, we're putting you out to pasture.
Exactly. Yeah.
I find that, if I'm intentional to really stay in it and to really understand where they're at and to not tell stories about the good old days, but to dream forward with them, that there is a lot of desire and heart for that.
Yeah.
So you decided with Caroline, getting ready to go to school, maybe it was time to start, taking your dogs and getting them all over the socials. Tell me about this children's book.
They needed an outlet. The children's book really came, I'd always wanted to do it, but I didn't know exactly what it would look like. And then we got these puppies, Piper and Mabel, at the end of Caroline's 5th grade year. And they are so out of control and so wild that I immediately knew, I was like, this is going to be a children's book. Like, they kind of became their own characters on the blog. And Mabel, I don't know why I gave her this persona where she writes haikus and she's very introspective. And so it kind of makes sense that she would end up being an author.
Yeah.
So she has that side of her personality. And so that's my first children's book is coming out.
That's so fun.
And it's about Piper and Mabel. And it's just kind of loosely based on the fact that they've gotten kicked out of every doggy daycare that we've ever tried to leave them in. That they are dropouts. They are doggy daycare dropouts. And so anyway, it's just kind of a fun story. I mean, I'm sure you're like this. Like, some of my favorite books are the ones that I read to Caroline when she was little.
Absolutely.
And so, I hope it'll just be a fun book that people could read with their kids and laugh and
it will give a lot of hope to those of us who, we did okay mothering the humans in our house.
Yes.
But the canines just went sideways.
No, you've only got so much energy.
Yeah.
So.
I know. We have some of those around here too.
Yeah.
So I don't think that Katie, she's called Pomeranian. She's half long-haired dachshund, half Pomeranian.
Oh, that is the
which my
best.
husband says you get twice the bark for half the brain.
Okay.
So I don't think in her persona she's doing haikus.
Okay.
Her litter mate that we had for a long time, George, I really really, I think if I was trying to write to the interior of his brain, it would have been a big echo.
Yes.
I think. I don't know that haikus would be, but I'm very, very excited to hear Piper and Mabel's voices.
Yeah.
as for your interpretation in this book. So, Melanie, thank you so much for taking that drive up I-35 from San Antonio to Austin. It's a bit hair-raising sometimes, but thankfully we're in Texas, so the bigger the hair, it's all good, even if it's from sheer terror.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here today.
Check out our show notes where you can connect with our guest and find out more. Do me a favor and subscribe and share the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from, and leave a 5-star rating and review. It helps get the word out about the podcast, and I thank you so much. Connect with me, particularly over on Instagram. I love me the grams. I'm Julie Lyles Carr there. I'm so thankful to interact with listeners each week. I just love it. So head on over and say hi. Thank you to Rebecca, our content coordinator, and Donna, our producer, the dynamic duo who make this podcast possible. Go to allmomdoes.com for an awesome resource and community for women walking through many of the same things you do with kids and spouses and work and faith. It's such a great place for you to connect and refresh. I'll see you next week with another fantastic episode of the Modern Motherhood Podcast.